Pfizer is a massive organization, but your team operates with real agility, testing new formats, building internal capabilities, and launching bold campaigns like your Super Bowl work. How does having an in-house media strategy team empower that kind of independence and speed?
Yeah, I think it's for me. It's in a few places, and I think that for me the in-housing thing has been sort of my. I always make the joke. It's my Hotel California, right? So you're going to hear it from me whenever you talk to me. But I think there's a couple of facets where it plays out. Like first is just that, to your point, agility. Like having people in the building who understand what's happening, who understand the goals, objectives of the organization. It's not that our agencies don't. It's just that you're embedded, right, and you understand what we're trying to achieve. I think just being able to coordinate conversations and learnings just happens at a much quicker pace when you're all part of the same organization. There's just also a big goal alignment. So this is, by the way, this is broader than the Super Bowl work, because I will say for our Super Bowl work, we were very integrated with everything between internal teams, external teams. But I think when you think about how an organization like rallies around just the day-to-day performance stuff, having internal media strategy, being able to set the agenda, work with the brands, communicate the goals, all be centrally aligned is just so powerful and just so much more quick in terms of how you can adapt and adjust what you're doing.
Josh, you've led performance marketing at some of the most data-driven brands out there. What does smart performance media look like at Pfizer today? And how are you evolving your approach across channels?
Yeah, it's very interesting because when I joined, there was a bunch of changes that were happening across the organization, and a lot of it around measurement, which obviously it's not a place that it's not my specific area of focus, but obviously it lives, it impacts the work that we're doing. And so there's lots of partnerships happening across the broader media team that I live with. And I'd say it's a few things. I mean, I think I have this like pithy saying that I use for my like guiding principles for my teams around being data-led, not data-limited. And what that really means is like, yeah, let's definitely look at the data, but let's also think about like, hey, like we can't really measure YouTube accurately, but do we really think there's the downside to being there or to having a bigger voice in places that can't be completely measured? So I like to always bring that lens of saying, look, we've got our gut, we've got our instinct, and sometimes those things are right. So let's like not solely focus on, hey, this like partner isn't driving a specific number, because there might be some more nuance to that. I will say as far as like what looks best, I mean, it's gonna go back to like business impact. And so I think Pfizer for years focused on reach, focused on efficiency metrics. I think at the moments in time where they did that, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It's more that the world has evolved so much, and frankly, measurement in healthcare has evolved so much, that we can actually see, are we reaching the right audience? If we're reaching them, what's the cost per that? What's the cost of that reach? Eventually, as you sort of flow down the path of purchase, because our purchase cycle is very different than others. It's did they visit a doctor? Did they go on script? Are they a new patient? Are they existing patient? And I think that's where we're trying to understand, like, forget about these front end metrics like clicks and CPMs and sort of, all those kinds of, again, I call them vanity metrics. They can be important, but it's more about, did that click actually yield someone who did something on our site, or actually take an action to go to the doctor and actually get the product that we need? Because that is the biggest differentiator between our category and others. I worked in healthcare, as you mentioned. A lot of instances, it's been more consumer health. And so I just got to get you in the store, and I get you reminding, or I got to get you to understand that that's the product, or remember it, and it's right there on Walmart's shelf, and you could just buy it yourself. This requires a doctor, this requires a pharmacist, there's a little more involved. And so we want to make sure we're managing that sort of like, that journey to make sure we're measuring all along the way.
Well, a perfect explanation of just how that kind of, what you can measure and what you can't measure, how it kind of, really does come together with, again, that sense of agility. So also supporting that, the idea of innovation is something I want to also ask you about. You're driving media transformation at Pfizer, from in-housing, as you mentioned, to strategic testing. How do you think about innovation within a highly regulated industry like healthcare, and how do you balance creativity with compliance?
Yeah. So the good news is, we have a process in place which is not as what you would think in terms of like, oh my gosh, it'll take us 10 years to get this out there, of just like the steps you have to take to get to innovation. So we've got a group that looks at like the new things we want to do and understands that, like, okay, we feel like this is acceptable, we'll move on to the next step. And sometimes that's actually the only step. Sometimes the next step is we're using a targeting parameter, or we're using an audience, and we need to work with privacy team to say, yep, that falls within our compliance guidelines. I will say my team has gotten in such a good rhythm with, like, we know what they want to hear, we know where they want to focus, we know what the buzzwords are in terms of what's good and what's bad. And my team is very thoughtful about calling out that, like, hey, this does seem to be different than what we're doing. So maybe it is something we should think about. And in a lot of cases, though, they're framing it under, hey, like, so these 3 companies that are approved in our privacy policies, this company's similar, but here's some nuanced difference. So we try our best to bring the teams along with that education. I think to me it's also like sort of the underpinning of the biggest reason, well, one of the biggest reasons you in-house is you just get deeper understanding in the building to help explain everything to the organization, right? So it's not a salesperson, your agency, a third party saying, oh, this is my secret sauce is the best. It is someone who has a vested interest in Pfizer and making sure we comply with everything we need to comply to. And so they do that sort of thoughtful approach. So I think that's sort of the first step. The other piece is, I think we have to keep looking at innovation. And what we've tried to do is sort of pull these things into like bulk categories of like, what's something at the platform level, what's something at a creative level that we could, if we do this, it can be scaled across the organization. Because we've got a lot of brands in a lot of different categories. And so some of the tests we'd like to do are more on the principle side of like auto optimization within a DSP or dynamic creative optimization around creative. Those, doesn't matter what disease state we're talking about, those hold for all of them. We do some specific tests for specific categories or disease states, but we try to focus a lot of it on how do we do things that touch the broader portfolio, because that's how you really get scale and that's how you really get performance.
Excellent. So many great points, Josh. I really appreciate it. One last question. Josh, I want to ask your advice. For marketers navigating a fragmented and fast-moving media landscape that you've described so aptly, what's your advice for how to lean into independence, intelligence, and innovation in ways that are actually meaningful and actionable?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, by the way, everything I say is like, it's a couple of things. It's usually two things, and then I come up with a third along the way as it's just coming out of my brain. I do think first and foremost, I'm a big proponent of expertise in the building, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have an agency, you should only work in-house teams. That's not at all what I'm thinking. It's more about like you need people in the building who have a deeper expertise of how platforms work, of how creative works, of how partnerships work, because there's just some level of that understanding that you marry with your brand background and the goals of the company that help you bring forward a plan that's like, okay, I get it. And frankly, there are times when like a partner's trying to tell you something, and when you have someone who's like, no, I don't think it works that way, or actually we could do it a different way, like you need that. And I think the more you have that in the building, the greater the greater opportunities there are for you to advance that opportunity. The other thing, I think hire experts, bring them in the building, have them integrate with the brands. I think another thing is like don't give up. Just keep trying, but keep trying in places that are small at first, right? Like we don't have to go for like the big high, let's redo our entire creative trafficking process overnight. Like think through like where your challenges are. How do you like put in, hey, we're gonna test on a brand, then a second brand, but then at that point, and I'm someone who likes to move quickly, let's go across the organization, right? Like let's not let this take so long. I think those are two of the biggest components in terms of how do you like advance organizations around that.